Welcome to Women Advancing, where the voices of world-changing women leaders gather to share their journeys, their insights, hopes, and frankly, their practical how-tos on how they're using their purpose-driven leadership skills to make the world a better place. I'm Kate Byrne, editor of Women Advancing, and also the CEO of Catapult X. I'm really feeling lucky to be the host this morning of our conversation. Impact investing is becoming more and more in vogue. And we hear much about it from a personal viewpoint often. Today, we're going to be speaking more from the enterprise vantage point and get some takeaways about how we can get our own companies to become more impactful from a broader lens and as a community player. We're fortunate to be joined by Claudine Emiot, who's the Senior Director of Impact Investing at Salesforce, where she's responsible for building and scaling Salesforce's impact investments. She leads a new $100 million fund focusing on investments in mission-driven enterprise technology companies in education, sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and social sector tech. Salesforce has been renowned as being an impact player, and the fact that they're really doubling down and building out these extraordinary funds across such a large group of cross-sector opportunities just is further testament to their leadership. The fund seeks investments with market returns and demonstrable social environmental impact, otherwise known as the E and the S of a filter called ESG, and frankly, opportunities to grow Salesforce ecosystem through strategic partnerships as with those companies that are involved. So Claudine, welcome. So good to see you. I'd love for the crew to hear about your path to getting to where you are today. It's been an interesting one, given that you started off at more of an entrepreneurial culture, and now you've shifted, well, it's been a while now, in a larger one. But tell us how you got to where you are.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Kate, for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. When I think about my career, the core through line from the very beginning to where I am now has been impact. And that's been my North Star and has shaped the opportunities that I've sought after. Those opportunities, though, have been really varied and not maybe what the traditional venture capitalist career path looks like. I came out of college at Harvard with a degree in East Asian Studies. And so I naturally went to Beijing for a year to put to use all of that hard-earned Mandarin studies that I had spent years doing. And I'd always been focused and interested during my time in school on economic development. And so I spent a year doing consulting in China before coming back to the States and joining an economic development consulting firm in the DC area. Then went on to graduate school, continuing again at MIT to focus on development economics. And after grad school, ended up continuing to work in that field, but with a focus on domestic economic development at the time of the recession, 2008 to 2010, which was really an interesting moment to be working on those issues in the US. And then came my pivot point where I was looking to shake up my career and go back to something, as you mentioned, that something that made me a bit more entrepreneurial, but also I missed sort of the global lens. And so I did what seemed completely natural and obvious at the time, which was to move to Kathmandu.
As one would.
And it wasn't a total, throwing a dart on a map situation. I did have actually a deep history with Nepal. And so it pulled me back there. But I think it was also at a point in life where I was really open to experimentation and taking a leap. And that leap was really important because it brought me to Kiva. So in Nepal, I spent several months working with one of Kiva's local microfinance partners on the ground there as a Kiva fellow. And then I spent several months more in Kathmandu doing some consulting work. It was a really great year that kind of forced me and my husband as well off the traditional sort of hamster wheel rat race and made us think about what we wanted to do in this next phase of our careers. Ultimately, we came back to the US and I joined Kiva full time on their investment team for a really exciting opportunity working on essentially a new financial product for social enterprises. So extending Kiva's model beyond microfinance and working directly with both for-profit and nonprofit startups that were solving big challenges in, health and education, fighting climate change in primarily emerging markets around the world. And I spent 5 years at Kiva, and I love it. I love working at this intersection of impact and tech and investing. And it was really my first exposure to a more, kind of entrepreneurial, tech forward environment, having come from, a more sort of traditional consulting background in the first half of my career. And 5 years later at Kiva, I was similarly starting to sort of pine for something to push me again. Ended up taking this fantastic opportunity at Salesforce to lead a new impact investing initiative there. And like you said, Kate, in your setup, Salesforce has long been known for being a mission-driven company, guided by the principle that business can be a force of good. It had always stood out to me as a really exciting place from that perspective. And when I thought about what it would take to leave a place like Kiva, it wasn't going to be for just anything, for sure. And it was really a very small, short list of companies that I felt like could meet that standard for impact, and at the same time offer an opportunity for me to build from the ground up an impact fund, and really taking Salesforce's commitment to doing good while doing business to a new level.
Two things on this that I love. One is back in 2005, Steve Jobs, did that famous speech, his commencement speech to the students at Stanford, talking all about the importance of dots. One of his key dots on his path was that calligraphy class that he took at Reed. And that was the very differentiator when he came up with the Mac that made it in the Apple so unique. And I was just going to say, there are many who would say, oh my gosh, Kathmandu, Nepal, but what a profound landing point, launching pad for you, both from an emerging market standpoint, but also to then meet the people in Kiva and then have it all follow out. And I can only imagine, now I'm playing forward, can't you see my crystal ball, about you're so beautifully positioned in background for what we are facing future forward. I really believe this, with just the potential for new models and investing models, et cetera. Plus, what a fascinating time to do all that in 2008. And it was early days. I mean, it was early days of impact. So really, you've been at the forefront, which is a testament. It's fantastic to have a woman at the forefront, I'm just going to say.
Well, I think so too. And I feel, thank you for those comments. I definitely am not someone who plotted out when I was 22, I'm going to, in 15 years, end up in a corporate venture arm doing impact investing. I probably didn't know what corporate venture was. It was a thing, but it wasn't a name thing then. And with impact as my through line, that has been what's consistent. And then what I've tried to do in my career is be open to new opportunities aren't necessarily the track that I envisioned 2 years ago or 5 years ago, but that present themselves, I think have enabled me to move my career into really interesting directions. I call it a combination of luck and pluck, because it is partly about being in the right place at the right time. As you said, we're in this moment where ESG is at the forefront of many conversations in corporate America, and that wasn't true, even 5 years ago. Now, did I predict that was going to happen? I'd like to say that I did. I didn't have that crystal ball, but because I've been guided by impact, it's put me in this place a bit unexpectedly, and I'm very grateful for it. And I'm most of all grateful that ESG and impact are becoming so embedded in conversations in business, because they should be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I've got to ask, so how do you keep that sort of entrepreneurial zest alive in what from the outside looks like this huge behemoth, like a Salesforce? So there was such a, I'm sure, especially early days Kiva, I can only imagine. So, but how do you, as you now find yourself in this larger entity, what are some pointers or suggestions you have, and what do you do to keep yourself sort of feeling that entrepreneurial vim and vigor?
I probably get energy from a couple different things when it comes to the entrepreneurial vim and vigor. For one, from my portfolio. So I get the pleasure of talking with entrepreneurs, both in our portfolio or in our pipeline on a near daily basis, hearing their stories about what drove them to create a solution to a seemingly intractable problem is really inspiring. And knowing how hard they work to build a sustainable, business that can ultimately solve some of the biggest challenges when it comes to climate change or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or in education. Being able to have, not just a seat at that table, but ideally also being able to bring to bear our resources as Salesforce, as a strategic investor in these companies is really energizing, especially in this year 2020, now bleeding into 2021, of multiple intersecting concurrent crises. We have a global pandemic alongside persistent climate change, alongside persistent systemic racism, increasingly dislocated workforce. We were certainly aware of all these problems before 2020, maybe not the global pandemic, didn't predict that one, like Bill Gates did.
We're good, not quite that. We missed that one.
But the others we were certainly aware of, and we're investing in solutions attacking them. But I think in a year that's been filled with so much tragedy and loss and suffering, it has been a helpful lifeblood to be doing this work, and to know that at the end of the day, I'm spending a lot of my time supporting companies that I think have a real shot at giving us a better world. And so I get a lot of energy from that.
I think it's always so extraordinary to get inside the mind of these social entrepreneurs who I liken it to a writer sitting down and staring at a blank piece of paper with nothing. And here these entrepreneurs come upon, well, their blank piece of paper is this huge problem. And where does one jump in and begin? And it's got to be extraordinary to see some of the true innovations and creativity. Have any of those, like, have you actually seen an idea and thought, wow, that's a really cool idea. I've got a problem, or Salesforce has a problem that we could possibly even use that line of thinking as a potential solution?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, a lot of our entrepreneurs in our portfolio have been inspired to create these companies out of their own lived experience, whether that's the CEO of Future Fuel, which is a solution for people to better manage and pay down faster their student debt. It's a $1.6 trillion problem in the United States. And she, like many of us, was saddled with a great deal of student debt, overwhelmed with how best to approach it, and recognizing that employers could play a really pivotal role in helping their employees with the platform to empower them to pay it down faster. Or a company that we recently invested in the education space called Paper, created by an elementary school teacher who saw the inequity in his own classroom between the kids whose parents were able to afford private tutoring on the side and those who are not, and the education gaps that were widening because of that, among other things. And so he was inspired to create a platform that is sold to large public school districts in the US that provides one-to-one on-demand tutoring for students. And especially in the times we're in at this moment, with continued distance learning across the country in many parts, again, the ever widening education gap, these solutions are really inspiring, and were created directly because the founders saw the problem themselves and said, I can't ignore it. I'm compelled to start something that is going to address it.
And they've got to be stunned. Well, because it is their own lived experience, they probably aren't stunned. But some of these things, one, fantastic, brilliant ideas. Also, sometimes it's the most obvious things where, gaps. And is this really truly a problem? And how is it that there isn't something like this already existing? And then discovering it doesn't exist, and then having the oomph to actually, okay, well, I guess it's going to be on me to start it. So amazing. What are some of the investment trends or the areas that you feel most bullish about? I know you talked about education and obviously energy, et cetera. I know and climate are huge. Are there specific parts of climate and then future workforce or other such areas like I would say wellness or that sort of thing and other forms
Mhm.
of tech?
Within our investment mandate as a strategic fund within Salesforce Ventures, we're specifically looking for enterprise software solutions because that's the company we represent. That's what we know is how we can add value. We're also looking for companies that can integrate with our platform. And then we're of course specifically looking for intentionality around impact and demonstrable impact that companies can point to, whether social or environmental. And so within sustainability, we are taking a very thesis-driven approach to look at subsectors within that space that fit that mandate, which is highly specific. But that still gives us a lot of opportunity for making investments. The spaces where we've been spending a lot of time trying to understand the opportunities and landscape include carbon accounting, carbon offsets, supply chain sustainability and transparency. I think solutions that sell into utilities is another area that has a lot of strategic relevance to us. So it's thinking about kind of the intersection of our mandate with where the opportunities are and going after them.
One thing I wanted to call out was when you talked about impact. And I think that's something that people ought to be aware of how people are defining impact. And, it's not enough to say, and that's why I think Salesforce has been so impressive and the companies they've been working with have been so impressive. It's not enough to say, great, we're throwing, as you said, we're not throwing money at it. And so when people are saying their impact, the impact wasn't, oh, we gave or we, helped back X amount of dollars. What it is it's that tail end that those dollars enabled. So
Right.
it's right, lives saved, trees grown,
Mm-hmm.
gallons drinkable, potable, mobility enabled. And I think so often people just think of it as, okay, we're going to toss a dollar over and that's the big impact. And it's really when we're thinking about it and when we as consumers are thinking about it, we need to look beyond just that. It's not just the money. It's what is the money? Where's your money sleeping at night?
Yeah. And we're very intentional throughout our process about how we think about and evaluate and measure and manage impact. So from, developing those early theses within a sector about what fits our sweet spot for investment and also intersects with the biggest problems out there in terms of building both a big business but also solving for breadth and depth of impact through the diligence process. When we build an impact narrative, we need to understand how the company's positioning itself within an impact problem, how we want to hear how they articulate how their solution is going to affect measurable outcomes, and we need to root that in the external evidence that we can find during due diligence. Essentially, we need to feel really confident in the impact story and impact narrative in order to invest. That has to be very strong in addition to the financial return profile and the strategic integration story. And then finally, for companies that we do invest in, we collect impact metrics across our portfolio on an annual basis. So we can report on how our portfolio is doing to solve these big problems. And we report annually in our stakeholder impact report, part of our broader ESG work as a company.
So that's a terrific point and I'm sure the Salesforce, frankly, stakeholders and shareholders all alike, that's a really important piece that everyone is involved and understands what's taking place. And then frankly, it's also on each of those various bodies to frankly, not demand, I guess that's the wrong word, but essentially every company should require that. And every shareholder should require it, and every corporate board should require it, every stakeholder should require it. And once we start doing that, then we can start seeing some exponential impact.
I think so.
So we're coming up on the end here, but I wanted to ask you, what are 3 takeaways that you would give someone who is looking to figure out a way to make their position, wherever they are internally, in a large company, a small company, more impactful? And then encourage this, what we were just talking about, actually, the delivery of making a purpose-driven effort within a company, so that it's playing its role as a contributing citizen.
If you're one person, whether you're inside a small company or medium sized or a massive enterprise, think about, first of all, what sort of special skills you bring that could have an impact for good on the world. If you feel drawn to doing good in the world, then I believe that you should follow that call. And I think the key is to really reflect on how you could do that.
Right?
Yeah.
You knew that it all, at the end of the day, everyone, it all goes back down to what your values are. And I just recently had to make a decision myself. And at first I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so confused. But when I got quiet and I sat there and I thought, okay, here are my 3 top values. And once I saw that, my decision was so clear. It was so obvious what was going to work and what wasn't going to work anymore. And if I was going to be true to me, which then means I can operate at my highest, which means I can make openings for others and bring them along with me. Your big one was enough.
Yes. Okay.
Because that's a big start. It's a big starting point. I think too. Here's something that's been very interesting. I've now had the opportunity to have, I want to say probably 15 different conversations with each one of you. Has been extraordinary in what you're giving back, what you're producing, what you're doing. But what's been fascinating to me is I think there is this myth, which is true if you're a doctor and a lawyer and an engineer. And if you have that clarity of path and it's that linear, oh my gosh, lucky on you. But every single person with whom I've spoken did not have that linearity of path at all. There might have been a kernel or a piece of it, but I think it's, as you said, I love luck and pluck.
Yeah.
It's just real. Stay open. And also,
stay open. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you get a little off the path, not the end of the world. So I am going to say, thank you so much